Investing in gold doesn't have to be complicated. I'm Colin Plume, the CEO of Noble Gold Investments, and I want to take the time to show you how investing in a gold IRA can help you hedge your bets against inflation and other economic concerns on the horizon. Visit Noble Gold Investments and get our free gold investment guide on buying gold the right way. And make sure you're investing with the right company. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com.
Good afternoon. I'm still reporting on the economy. Please don't forget to like this report and hit that subscribe button below. As the U.S. rushes into spending more billions in Ukraine and will need to spend billions more if China attacks Taiwan, our economy is rushing towards yet another debt limit scrum this summer. The national debt limit right now is $28.9 trillion, yet experts believe the real national debt is more like $33 trillion. In 2020, the U.S. government spent $522 billion on just the interest payments on the national debt, mostly to the biggest banks. That's about what was spent on the military, about 8% of the total federal budget. As the national debt continues to grow and interest rates continue to rise, interest payments on the debt will skyrocket. Before Joe Biden leaves office, we could see trillion-dollar per year interest payments on the national debt. But are these interest payments necessary? The answer is no. I'll say it again, no more national debt. On July 4, 2011, we did a report on yet another time when the U.S. government approached yet another, far smaller national debt limit. The solution today is exactly the same as it was back then. The answers are timeless and anyone can understand them. Here, I'm going to lay it out again. The debt is the interest paid on U.S. bonds sold into the market. They carry interest. That's why people and big banks buy them. Under the system, the interest payments will never go anywhere but up, up, up. But we can escape. As each bond comes due, pay it off, not in Federal Reserve notes. Pay it off with an even older form of American money, the money that won the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. Pay the bonds off in United States notes, the oldest form of U.S. money. U.S. notes are not interest-bearing. Federal Reserve notes are interest-bearing. And as you gradually pay off the bonds with U.S. notes or their electronic equivalents, you simply don't reissue new Federal Reserve notes. Done. Make it illegal to reissue Federal Reserve notes. Give holders of those notes or their electronic equivalents 1 year to exchange them for the red-sealed U.S. notes on a one-for-one basis. That's all you do to fix this problem. It doesn't cost the government anything to do it, and that essentially snatches the money power away from the Fed and returns it to Congress, which is the way it should be. Any questions? Put them in the comments section below. And don't forget to like this report, hit that subscribe button below.
The television news is abuzz this weekend. Will the United States Congress fail to raise the debt ceiling and thereby begin defaulting on its debts? Two things. First of all, default isn't going to happen. Why? Because the U.S. stock market would tumble, and that would be bad for whichever political party does not succeed in blaming the other for the downturn. Too risky, won't happen. But there's another reason, the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Now, most people think the 14th Amendment, passed just after the Civil War in 1868, was all about freeing the slaves. Well, it was about that, but in Article 4 of the 14th Amendment, it also states the following: the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned. What this means is that if Congress fails to provide the money to cover what it already voted to spend, that is clearly unconstitutional. So that settles that. Hat tip to dedicated researcher Paul Mealy of Florida for that nugget. However, I completely agree with not raising the debt limit, but probably for different reasons than the Republicans. Sovereign nations do not have to borrow money. They can create it. They should create it. And if they intend to remain sovereign, they must create it. You see, there are only two choices in this big bad world of sovereign nations. You can let your elected government create the money completely in the public interest, completely debt-free, or you inevitably, in one way or another, give that power away to the banks. There is no other choice. When the big bankers get control of the money system, as they have since the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, then they will inevitably centralize the wealth of the nation into few hands, their hands. That's why bank buildings are the biggest in every city on this planet. But it doesn't have to be this way. History has shown time and time again that nations can be wealthy and stable without any debt whatsoever. After all, if you had a money printing machine in your basement that was legal to use and you wanted to go out and build a new house, would you go borrow the money from a bank or would you print it in your basement? What the U.S. is doing by raising the debt ceiling is allowing the sale of more government bonds, which carry interest and are purchased primarily by the biggest banks, including central banks. Now, if that isn't bad enough, these big banks don't actually have any money. They just make it up by typing numbers into their computers. Then they use these made-up numbers to buy government bonds, and we then have to pay them interest. Yep, that's how it's done. Thomas Jefferson identified this problem nearly 200 years ago. In 1815, Jefferson wrote to then-President Monroe, "The dominion of the banks must be broken or it will break us." This has been going on for a long, long time. The big bankers try to convince the voting electorate and Congress that they are the only ones smart enough to run the money system. This running battle between bankers and Congress has gone on throughout American history, but rarely appears in history books. For example, in 1815, during one such battle, Jefferson wrote to Treasury Secretary Gallatin. The Treasury, lacking confidence in the country, delivered itself bound hand and foot to bold and bankrupt bankers, pretending to have money, whom it could have crushed at any moment. They don't have the money. They just make it up. This is called fractional reserve lending, and it has to stop. Instead of borrowing these Federal Reserve notes, primarily from bankers, why don't we just print these notes, U.S. notes, without borrowing a nickel? To me, all this debt ceiling debate is just political theater, a sideshow meant to divert us from a much more important decision point involving humankind's battle for freedom over the last 1,000 years. That question is, can elected governments continue to operate in the public interest? Or should we just give up on our cherished dreams of freedom for all humankind and just quit trying to band together in governments of, by, and for we the people? Do you believe in self-governance or not? An alarming number of you don't, and that's sad. 1 million Americans have selflessly given their lives for the first time in history to defend a concept, freedom. Yes, bankers make money on war, but the average soldier doesn't. They get paid very little indeed. They are there to protect freedom, somehow, somewhere. Are you ready to give up on that sacrifice? Are we ready to say, you win, have your new world order, we don't care about freedom anymore? I don't think so. Or are you prepared to stand and fight to preserve this cherished concept of human freedom? And I'm not just talking to Americans, I'm talking to my international audience out there as well. The issue is just the same in every nation. Big bankers have centralized the wealth of every nation to such a degree that politicians are scared to fight them. And the biggest news media are no help because they are either owned directly by the biggest bankers or are so dependent on their loans and advertising that they won't breathe a word of this essential truth. We have to fix this in every nation. Otherwise, you have government by banks, plutocracy. That's just a fancy word for serfdom. Is that what you want? The only way to secure freedom is through the collective power of a representative government. In the words of one of the primary authors of the U.S. Constitution, Gouverneur Morris, in a letter to James Madison written in 1787, "The rich will strive to establish their dominion and enslave the rest. They always did, they always will. They will have the same effect here as elsewhere if we do not, by the power of government, keep them in their proper spheres." So we aren't talking about arresting the rich or taking their money. We're talking about keeping them in their proper spheres. So what's that? William Jennings Bryan said it best in his Cross of Gold speech in 1896. Those who are opposed to this proposition tell us that the issue of money is a function of the bank and that government ought to go out of the banking business. I stand with Jefferson rather than with them and say that the issue of money is a function of the government and that the banks should go out of the governing business. And that's it. Bankers can't run everything. That's all we are asking. Take back the money power and restore it to the people to whom it properly belongs. Forbid any more government borrowing. Pay off the existing debt with these debt-free U.S. notes and their electronic equivalents instead of these Federal Reserve notes, which are created by more borrowing. After we have paid off the debt, don't allow government to borrow again. As Byron Dale says,
well, you can't borrow yourself out of debt. General Motors can't, you and I can't, the federal government can't. Nobody can borrow themselves out of debt. No more than, like I said before, you cannot drink yourself sober.
we can't get out of debt by borrowing more money. It can't be done. Do not raise the debt ceiling. Yes, the bankers will crash the stock market, but that won't last forever, whereas their debt money system will last forever otherwise. I'm still reporting on the economy. Good day.